In the fifth and last of this series of How to Be Good, I'm talking to Ed Wingfield about how to be good as a soldier. Ed Wingfield, what does it mean to you to be good as a soldier?
Well, there's a tension in the question, which I think is sort of very acute for a soldier, in that being good professionally is what you want to do in any activity, but also you want to be good morally and virtuously. And for a soldier, that's kind of front and centre of everything that you do because of the nature of what you're doing. And so I'm not sure I have a fully reasoned and rational, logically coherent answer. But the way I'd like to try to get to one is to look at that firstly by the way in which the army sort of tells its soldiers quite explicitly how it expects them to be good, both professionally and in terms of virtue and acting morally. And that's really to start from the idea that the army is about violence, and the most fundamental aspect of the army is that it exists to use violence to up to and including lethal force in the service of the nation. And so as a soldier you have a responsibility to do something which is universally considered to be not good, and how do you get around that problem? The second sort of fundamental aspect to what soldiering involves is that it means not only being prepared to kill others or to order other people to kill others, but being prepared to lay down your own life or to see the lives of your comrades being laid down in order to achieve something else. So it's a two-way sort of action. And then the third sort of fundamental thing about soldiering, which this involves, universally it's a group activity. And that means that, and this I think is probably what differentiates an organised body of soldiers in the service of a state, so an army, is that they are subject to some form of discipline and some form of collective morale. And the army uses those three aspects of soldiering to be ready to kill, to be ready to die yourself, or to see your comrades die, and to have to work together in a group to come up with what it calls six values, which are the fundamental values of soldiering. Now, the interesting thing is that those values are derived, they're purely subjective. The army has come up with these values to, not as ends in themselves, but, to allow it to be an effective fighting force. And the effect it's seeking to improve is what it calls the moral component of fighting power. But that aspect of soldiering isn't about morality as in right or wrong, it's about moral as in morale, the good strength and effectiveness of the soldier. But, and this is the bit that we may want to explore, it is interesting that those values, which are things like selfless commitment, courage, discipline, that those values do have we generally feel that they are universal and good in and of themselves, not just good because they help you to be a good professional soldier. So there is, and this is where the logic gets fuzzy, but the sort of, by starting from a position of, possibly utilitarian or subjective morality, you try to get to a area where you're acting out of a decision about what is truly good as opposed to bad, not good as opposed to the ineffective. Yeah. For Western rules, which have become the universal law of armed conflict, it comes down to the just war tradition, and there is the most important distinction in that, as far as a soldier is concerned, as opposed to someone who is deciding whether or not to use a politician or the head of a state, is not the decision about whether to go to war or not, but how to act within that war, and the idea that you should act, you should discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. You should act proportionally to the amount of force that is being used against you, and inside that there's an idea about self-defense, and that there is an absolute prohibition on some things: inhumane treatment of prisoners, the use of what are considered to be absolutely evil weapons, like chemical weapons, for instance. So that's sort of fairly well understood, although not always practiced fully. Most soldiers, most of the time, are desperate to go to war because that's what they've trained to do, and there's they're young people who've joined the army and they want to sort of be full of action and adventure, and this opportunity comes. I think that the job of the if there's anything we've learned from the last sort of the history since 2001 of the way Britain has got involved in wars, it is that the military is always over keen to make its case for having a military option, and politicians need to be wary of that. And I think politicians through experience, bitter experience, have learnt to be more wary of the military option. There have been a very small number of cases of people who have sort of refused to soldier, and they've, I think in most cases, been quite sympathetically listened to by that there's a sort of system to address that and listen to people's concerns. It hasn't led to any. It's kind of been, we'll take them out of the problem, and the machine will keep rolling that way anyhow. So
yep.
The trick is to try at your own level of influence change things around so what you're doing is both professionally good and, you hope, morally good.
And since refusing to soldier is a rare and sort of unusual and in some ways kind of off the charts thing, people are mostly managing the combination of working between the rules and their own moral judgments and trying to make something that both succeeds.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a it's not an immediate question every day sort of thing. It's a fairly it's something to consider before you join the army, and at set points when you're in the army, it's not then something that you confronts you or if it is, you probably something is going wrong and you should be changing it. But yeah.
One of the things that interested me in what you said at the beginning was about soldiering being a group activity. Is there a tension between that and those moments when a soldier is deciding for themselves what the right thing to do is?
There can be, and I think that that's where the aspect of soldiering that is about leadership and an individual sort of stepping slightly away from the group comes into play, and there's there was an analogy that was very common in sort of probably 2007, 8, 9, 10 for troops going to Afghanistan around what it involves being an officer, a young officer, a platoon commander, so the sort of most junior officer in command of a platoon of riflemen, and in the sort of classic army setup, there will be a platoon commander supported by a platoon sergeant who is normally older than the platoon commander, has certainly spent longer in the army, probably sort of 12 years as opposed to 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, and will know all the pamphlet, if we go back to that analogy, much better. And when a platoon gets to a sort of efficient, well-oiled stage of being professionally good, which by the time it's gone through the training to go on an operational tour, it should have done and almost certainly will have done, the role of the officer needs to be and does become not to be involved in the sort of day-to-day management and decision-making process, but to be able to step back. And the analogy that was often used was the platoon sergeant has the trigger on the platoon, but the platoon commander has the safety catch. And so that person is stepping back and hopefully deciding when doing what is the sort of the following the natural steps is actually not the right thing to do, and you need to stop and reconsider. But also, I go back to, if we're on to just war theory, I go back to that's fascinating stuff, but it's not really the day-to-day concern of very many soldiers at all. Almost all soldiers, apart from the right at the very top, are faced with that. That has happened. That's all context. It doesn't give you a guide for what do you do in the situation you find yourself in. To think of another example of this, I can remember in Basra in 2006, which was the height of the sort of civil war in Iraq, which wasn't really involving the coalition forces, but we were sort of desperately trying to stop it. And also it was the height of the British involvement in Basra, having got been overwhelmed by too few troops in too big a place, and we tried to reset that with a operation called Operation Sinbad, which was a sort of 6-month-long thing, and it involved a whole series of different activities, on the sort of scale of size and impact. And one of these that I was involved in was spending a week going, sort of commuting every day into the city in a fleet of soft-skinned Land Rovers, and guarding a site which was a school to rebuild the school, which actually was very successful. We protected a load of carpenters and engineers and plumbers and painters who did all this, and we rebuilt the school. But over the course of the week, gradually the sort of amount of minor violence and aggro, so sort of low-scale rioting rather than not lethal violence by any means, increased. But all the time there was quite a lot of sort of violence going on around in different other parts of the street. So it was a relatively dangerous thing to be doing, and it was also we thought the immediate effect we were trying to do was very, very positive, but we didn't know how that was going to work. And then leaving the school at the end of this, nicely painted, new books, everything, and all the people the crowds who'd been building up around us sort of came in and tore the place apart and shredded it. So you kind of think, well, what's the point? And there is a sort of futility to many things that you do, not just in soldiering but in life. But within that, you have to say, well, there's both an element of accepting that things aren't always going to turn out how you wanted to, but also trying to do the right thing when you're faced with that. And also part of the right thing is minimising keeping your own people safe and not getting involved in an unnecessary fight with the people around you. This is not, it's not a sort of linear or simple or logically coherent, at least I haven't managed to make it so for myself, set of sort of rules for living in the world as a soldier. But it can be a guide to how you think and therefore how you feel you should act. And I think part of it is just having to accept that life is full of inconsistencies, and despite those inconsistencies, you can find something that is gives you a strong idea of what is the right or wrong way to do things, and at the same time you can accept you might get that wrong. Yeah. What primarily attracts me to Christianity is not the idea that this is prescribing a set of rules to follow and how to act in life, but it is as a consolation for realising that I've failed to do all sorts of things, and that the world is broken. I am part of making it a broken place, and that Christianity can provide some sort of solace for that.
Ed Wingfield, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Astonishingly, this is the last in our series of films, but it's not the last event in the How to Be Good series. So, if you've enjoyed these, why not come and join us in person next Thursday, the 11th of October, in the much larger surroundings of Ely Cathedral itself, where we'll be drawing the threads of the series together, talking about business, and asking, well, deciding, I suppose, what we've learned about how to be good. We hope you enjoyed those, and we would very much like to know what you thought of them. So why not comment down there? And also let us know what else you think we ought to be doing, because this is something of a new venture for Ely Cathedral. As far as we're concerned, cathedrals are supposed to be places that help with public thinking. Suggestions welcome. Remember, subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos, and remember to click the notification bell.